Hey folks, welcome back to My Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor and this is my March 2024 reading wrap up. There were certain things I think went well for me in March. There were certain things I'm a little bit disappointed in myself for. But, you know, it was a decent month. So I read 10 books, finished 10 books. So that's good. 2 of them were by authors of colour, so that's also good. Not so happy with myself that none of them had queer characters. And also I was a bit lazy. So yeah, in terms of what I was reading. So, and I actually did read a lot more than the 10, but I got to the point where I was reading so many Pride and Prejudice variations just because my brain couldn't deal with anything else, that I only included new ones rather than all the old ones I was rereading. Didn't include any of them in my list because I was just going through them like candy. So so yeah, I was a bit disappointed in myself for that, but it was just one of those months where my brain didn't want to be dealing with things. But anyway, I did read, like I said, I did read 10 books, and there were 10 books that were new to me. So let's go through them. Yes, before I go there, I was going to do a Friday reads for this weekend, but even though it was a public holiday, was tired, forgot. So since the month's finished and it's now Monday, yeah, my March wrap up. So anyway, first thing I read was a book called Away from Longbourn, which was by Irene Onday. I think that's her name. The way she shows up on various apps is a bit weird, but P&P variation, this was new to me, and it was a case of new author to me, and this one was an Auntie Bennett's and Auntie Jane, which I'm not always particularly fond of, but sometimes when I'm in a mood I can read them. And in this case it was one where the Bennets had so little care for Elizabeth that she ends up going to the Gardiners, and her life diverts because Jane in particular, I think if I'm remembering this one correctly, was very jealous of Lizzie when she met Darcy in London and was getting married before her, etc, etc, etc. Oh, that's right, this is the one where not only was there the Gardiners were good to her, but she had a cousin on her Bennet side, from I think Mr. Bennet's sister, who had lived with the Bennets for a while after her parents died, but eventually left because the Bennets didn't like her. But she took Lizzie in when Lizzie basically ran away. So there was that. It was a decent read. I'm not sure if it's one I'll reread much, but you know. Then I read another one by Irene, which was That Older Sister of Mine, which was like a bit more of a like short story novella type thing. And it was epistolary, so it was like a diary. It was Lydia writing a diary, and it was a very different Lydia, a Lydia that looks up to Lizzie, and therefore viewing the events of Pride and Prejudice from a Lydia that looks up to Lizzie and thinks the world of Lizzie and wants to help Lizzie get what she wants in life. So that was kind of fun. Then I read one by Melissa Ann called A Different Impression, and very much involves Lizzie undertaking acts of kindness. Therefore the assembly goes very, very different because she makes a very different impression on the Netherfield party, and therefore the Netherfield party makes a very different impression on the Meryton area. Then I read a couple of Jen Rollins, which were new to me because they were ones I wasn't entirely sure were my thing, which sometimes happens with, like, there's actually quite a few Jen Rollins I haven't read because I'm not sure the tropes are kind of my thing. But so I read Fate's Intervention, which is one where Lydia injures herself when she's about to, like, literally when she's getting into the carriage to leave with the Forsters to go to Brighton. She injures her ankle, can't go. And so that therefore changes the events that happen after, because Lydia is not in Brighton and therefore Wickham can't take advantage of her. And then the second one was Bingley's Indignation, where Bingley, when Darcy admits to him that he knew Jane was in town and kept it from him, Bingley gets really, really angry and indignant and kicks him out. And so therefore it's got to wait a bit until Lizzie and Darcy can get their happy ever after, because of course, without being able to stay in Netherfield, Darcy can't actually stay in the area and therefore can't get together with Lizzie. So there was that one. Then I finally finished listening to the audiobook Call Me Indian by Fred Sasakamoose. This is the biography of the first Indigenous treaty hockey player that I've been reading. So definitely my best read of the month. It was a 5-star. It was painful to read because, like I've said previously, there's a lot of stuff about his experiences being forced to go to a residential school in Canada. There's a lot of stuff about his hockey career his NHL career was only a handful of games, but he had a continuing professional hockey career into like his 40s in some of the minor leagues around Canada. But once he sort of got to the end of that, he had problems with alcohol, he lost a lot of people quite tragically, including one of his own children. And then it moved on to his later years in which he was doing his best to recover, to get past the alcoholism, to help his community on his reservation, and the work that he then started to do with young people, trying to get them into sport and away from drugs and alcohol, and all the way up until like the pandemic, and the fact that he was in the 21st century starting to receive recognition for his hockey career, for being the first of his people to have that sort of professional career, and for the work that he was doing. He passed away just after this book was published, so I'm really glad he got a chance to tell his story, because he was very honest towards the end in that he wanted to tell his own story because it wasn't all good. And he needed to be honest about the fact that it wasn't all good, that he made mistakes, that he did things the wrong way. But you can overcome that. And yeah, so that was a really good read. I thoroughly recommend it. It can be triggering because there's a lot of abuse stuff, child abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of discussion of drugs. He never took illegal drugs, but he does go quite a lot into the fact that once you hit the 80s, drugs started to come in on the reservation, and he started to see a lot of that sort of drug use in the young people. So, yeah, definitely worth a read, but just be very, very aware that it deals with some really difficult topics. So I did finish reading that. Then I also finished reading, and I haven't done a lot of running and exercise and getting my reading done on the treadmill because I've had some niggling injuries, but I did manage to finish Uncanny Magazine issue 51, which is of course edited by Lynn and Michael Thomas. SFF short stories, essays, poetry. Not a huge amount of stories really stuck out to me. Did I note any down? I don't think I did. Yeah, it was a good read in that I've rated the entire issue 4 stars, but none of them really stuck out as like, this is something I want to nominate for an award kind of thing. It was just really high quality the whole way through. Then I read another Melissa Ann Pride and Prejudice variation called Hearts Entwined. Again, another one with Bad Bennet's, Young Lizzie, and Darcy being a second son. This was really interesting because Darcy was actually a second son who was a lawyer when he met Lizzie. And so they come from that sort of different backgrounds, in that he's not as far above her because he's a second son. He's got a certain amount of inheritance, but and it turns out that Lizzie does as well, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. But then they're not so far apart because he is a second son for the moment. But yeah, so there was that. And then there was a couple of physical books. This one I read for class, The Association of Small Bombs by Karan Mahajan. Not for me. I can see that it's very well written, but I rated it 2 stars because it's just not my thing. It's contemporary literature. It's a book about essentially a bombing in India and the way the consequences of that bombing ripple out into various characters, not only the victims and the families of the victims, but also the terrorists themselves, and how, yeah, it's very depressing. Supposedly supposed to be darkly comedic and satirical, but I didn't find it funny at all. I often don't with these kind of books. I really struggle to find the humour in them. So I think a well-written book, but just not my thing. So that's The Association of Small Bombs. And then I did finally finish Cinder by Marissa Myers. So this is YA. It's science fictional, but using the structure of fairy tales. And I think I actually, at some stage, probably not anytime soon, but at some stage I do want to continue the series just because it ended in a place which is a bit of a cliffhanger, and I'm like, I actually want to know what happens next. But essentially we've got an android called Cinder, who's the kind of unwanted stepdaughter, adoptive daughter / belonging slave to her stepmother. There's a plague happening. There's the very scary queen of the lunar colony coming down to visit their country, their empire, and the prince's father is dying from this plague, and everything's all a bit weird. And there's a ball that's going to happen. Of course there is. So, and yeah, so very interesting. Well, I won't say interesting, but fun read, and enough of a plot like that I'm like, I do actually want to see where the rest of this series goes. I kind of want to read the next book and see what happens. So yeah, very well worth a read. And those were the 10 things that I read officially in March. Yeah, so like I said, decent reading months. There were certain goals that I definitely met. I read, 2 books by authors of colour. I'm failing a bit on queer characters at the moment, so I need to look into some books that will get me through up those numbers a bit. But still a decent reading month, so that's good. This month I'm hoping will be pretty good because there's a Dewey's Readathon coming up, and I also have this week off work, so that's good, which is sort of to study because I've got an assignment due next week that is due on an awkward day, so I'd like to get a chunk of that done this week. And also I also want to get some rest because I have so many physical niggles at the moment. I'm hoping a week's rest will just reset me and I can hopefully start getting some exercise and do some reading. So particularly because there's not a lot of I'm running out of fanfic stuff to read because everything's sort of in a bit of a lull at the moment. So yeah, hopefully April will be a good reading month. Hopefully I'll be a bit less lazy on my part. Anyway, that's it, and please feel free to like and subscribe. Love talking about books in the comments, and I'll see you all again really soon. Bye.